Papa said build a bridge, must subtract the division. Discernment dictate decisions, relationship and religion. Hard these days to be balanced, seen the world so cold. Leaders barely being biblical, boys afraid to be bold. Ain't the Jesus I know, all praise to the chief. One and only high priest, son of God with the keys. Price of life ain't cheap, paid in blood not clean. Wanna cross over water, follow what he taught us, start walking. I'ma go build a bridge. Yeah, he said build a bridge. A lot of tensions on the sides, word be dividing truth from the fibs. Christ the light and it's lit, time to go build a bridge. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, 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 bold.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to The Bridge. My name is Jesse Bailey, and I'm so glad that you joined us tonight. We got an exciting topic to discuss tonight. It's going to be very interesting, so I'm glad that you're here. But before we get started, just want to remind everybody of a couple of things. Number one, this is about building bridges. So my intent here is not to stir stuff up, but to bring people together. I believe that it's important that during these times of confusion and chaos and high emotions that we have a forum where we can talk and have conversations and discuss things civilly and come to an understanding and build bridges between individuals. However, we need to remember that the main bridge that we're trying to build is between us and truth. It's good for us to come together. It's good for us to come to an understanding, but truth is the bridge that brings people together. That's what we're really trying to get to. Not so much argue my point and try and be right, but try and discover what is truth. Try and discover what is right. And we have three principles that we go by. And number one, we got to keep it bold. That means that we have the comfort level in this setting to be honest and have real conversations with each other. That means that we can speak the truth without hesitation, whether it's the truth of how we feel, whether the truth of a fact, without offending or being offended. So let's keep it bold tonight. Let's say what's on our heart, say what's on our mind, and be able to receive it in a way that allows us to continue the conversation. And so don't get upset just because somebody's being bold. Let's give them that honor and that right, and we'll assume that we can have that honor and right as well. Next, we got to keep it balanced. In this day and age, we get so extreme in our sides. We dig our bunkers and then we just sit there and we hunker down and we don't want to move. Well, listen, we got to be balanced. We can't move to these extreme thoughts and everything. It's easy to be extreme. It's easy to be extreme. It's difficult to be balanced. I mean, think about it. If you're working out and you're exercising, I don't know if you've ever been to a fitness trainer or anything like that, but when they really want things to be difficult, they'll do things that cause you to balance. So they'll have you do those push-ups, but you do them on an exercise ball or something like that. Why? Because it causes you to use your core and to be stable, and it's harder work. So it's harder work for us to be balanced and not go to an extreme. You can stand on one side of a seesaw, and that's easy. But when you have to stand in the middle and really find the balance, that's what makes it difficult. So let's try and avoid the extremes, even though there are some extremes that are true. We cannot deny that. And the last thing is this: we keep it biblical. I make no apologies, but I am a born-again Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. I'm also a pastor, and that is my worldview. I understand that it may not be everybody's worldview, and that is okay. I like to have the opportunity to discuss those worldviews and how they impact our thoughts, our mind, our society. And it's important for us to have those discussions. But I just want everybody to know that that is the worldview that I am taking and approaching from. So as long as we are clear on those three things, we keep it bold, we keep it balanced, and I'm going to keep it biblical, but I invite your worldview, then let's do this. So tonight, we're going to have a conversation. And remember, it is just that. It is a conversation. I want to talk to you guys about racism, about what your experiences are, but I want to set the stage for that context real quick. But before I do that, I just want to remind everybody that this is a conversation, and I would love your feedback. If you want to text in your questions or comments, the number is right there, 818-835-4030. And I invite everyone to come in. If you'd like to have a conversation, you can text in and say, "Hey, I'd like to speak on that." I will call you and we will get you on live right here so we can have a conversation. I think talking is important. The more interaction we have, I think the better it is for us to come to an understanding. So here we go. I had a conversation with a friend recently, and he is truly a friend and a brother. He is a believer. And when I say believer, sometimes I use Christianese, so you guys forgive me. But believer, I mean that they believe in Jesus and they are a Christian and have dedicated their life to serving Christ. But we have some different views. And he, I would say, just based on how the political world is set up, leans more left, and I definitely lean right. And in the midst of our conversation, we were talking about a lot of different things in regards to Black Lives Matter, in regards to what the true issues are in the Black community. And our conversation got pretty intense, not disrespectful. But at one point, it began to shift a little bit. And this gentleman got really heated. And he's a passionate individual. And he's a great guy, but very passionate. He's a creative, singer, rapper, artist. And he eventually said, "Well, you're only half black, so you don't really know what racism is. You don't really experience racism to the fullest." And that took me back. I was like, what kind of sense does that make? But being balanced, we continued our conversation, and I didn't really even hit on that point because to me, I'll be honest, it's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. It's because you have a little bit darker complexion, then I'm not going to experience racism the way that you would experience racism. So I wanted to talk a bit about that and just the reality of it and try and keep a balanced perspective, try and see it from where he was coming from. But then I want that to kind of create the framework for talking about racism and what we can actually do about it. Because one of the things that I'm all about is solutions. I'm not one to just yell and scream and cry and say, "Hey, there's a problem. We actually have to do something about it. And we have to evaluate, are the things that are being done right now really going to help with racism? Is the narrative that's being put out there right now, is it true? And is it helping with this issue? So I want to first start out by trying to take it from this gentleman's perspective. This brother is from, we grew up in two different areas. He grew up more East Coast. I grew up here on the West Coast. He's a darker complexion than I am. And, I am half black. My mother was white. My father was black. My father from Texas. My mom from out here in California. This gentleman's family, from what I understand, is all back east. So there's some cultural differences there as well. And I can understand how someone who is darker than me and let's just say has more prevalent black features than me could interpret my complexion, my look as being less black. I mean, and genetically speaking, yes. And therefore equate being less black to experiencing less racism, which would be directed towards blacks. I mean, it just mathematically, let's think about it. If you're half black, then you experience half the racism. Okay, I'll just start right there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that because from my perspective, it doesn't make sense at all. I have never had anyone think of me as anything other than a black man. I've had people that have just seen me as a human being, but if I was to ask most people, what am I? They say I'm black. Now, when I was younger and I had my little curls going on and everything, some people thought that I was maybe black and Latin mixed. Some people thought I was actually Puerto Rican. Boricua to everybody out there. I don't even know what that means, so I probably shouldn't say it, but oh well. I just have a very dear Puerto Rican friend, and she says that all the time. So what I'm saying is I can understand how you might think that, but I've always been seen as black. And to be quite honest, I actually think it's the exact opposite. I think that because I'm black and half black, half white, I actually experienced more racism than someone who is just straight black. And I'll explain why. First of all, I want to tell you guys a story. I'm going to tell a lot of stories about me and my family. It's not all about me, but I'm just sharing my experience so to kind of give the context of the frame for what we're talking about here. My parents were married back in 1964, right in the middle of the civil rights movement. My father was black from Texas. My mom is white out here, raised in Central California. And they met at college at Chapman College back then. It was Chapman University now. And they went through a lot. There was so much that they went through, I don't have time to talk about it. But one thing that they decided was that they were going to have children. And children they did have. As a matter of fact, they had 14 children. I'm the 10th born of 14 biracial children. We were raised in South Orange County. And a couple years ago, my father passed away. And at the funeral was one of his dearest friends. And after the funeral, we gathered at my sister's house. And we were just reminiscing and telling stories. And this gentleman who happened to marry my mom and dad, he was the officiant for them because they couldn't find very many other people who would do it. He told me something about my parents that I never knew. And he asked me while we were all standing in the kitchen, he said, "Do you know why your parents decided to have so many children?" I said, "Well, it's because my oldest sister, Margaret, was so cute when she came out." And we kind of laughed and chuckled. He said, "No, actually, it was on purpose." He said they knew that because you were going to be biracial, that you would be rejected both by whites and blacks. And they wanted to make sure that there was enough of you so that you guys never felt alone. And I was so taken back by that because I never thought that there was much intention given to the number of children. Now, I don't know if they said, okay, we're going to have 14, but that was part of their decision. That was part of the reason why they wanted to have so many children, was because they knew that we were going to feel a certain level of rejection. Now, growing up, the way my parents raised us, I didn't even know there was anything different about us, to be quite honest. When we went to church, we were just the Bailey family. You know, we hung out with everybody. My parents talked to everyone. They had black friends, white friends, all colored friends. You know, we grew up in South Orange County, and there weren't a whole lot of colored people down there at the time. And this is, you know, when I was coming up, this was in the 80s and the 90s. But there were still people there. And it was never a thought in my mind, or to many of my brothers and sisters, at least in my the lower generation, you know, the youngers, that gave race a second thought. We didn't think much of it at all. And I guess I can only speak for myself personally, but I didn't even know that there was anything different about me until I got into elementary school. And I actually remember the day that it happened. There were some kids, and they started calling me names, and I didn't understand why they were calling me these particular names. They would call me Cinnamon. They would call me Burnt Toast. That was one of my favorites. And I was like, Burnt Toast? Cinnamon? What is that about? And one guy, I remember his name. I won't say it on here. Actually, I will say it later because it turned out good. We ended up being good friends. But he called me a big freckle. I gotta laugh because I'm like, these are the names that kids would come up with for me. A big freckle, cinnamon, burnt toast, all that stuff, and it all had to do with the color of my skin. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Now, when I heard these things, I didn't think much of it. I just thought, oh, these people are just finding names to call me, and I realized that it had to do with the color of my skin. But I was like, oh, okay, you know, I'm darker than you, so I look like a freckle. And this kid in particular who said that, I said, at least I'm one color. I was like, you got all kinds of colors, because he had a bunch of freckles. The kid that called me one big freckle, you know, he was a ginger redhead kid, and he had all these freckles. I was like, at least I'm one. I was like, you're a bunch of freckles. But to me, it wasn't a race thing. It was just appearance. It was just kids picking on each other. And I remember even where I was at the elementary school, and he got so mad about it. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But I remember these guys. And I remember the things that they said, and I remember them trying to get to me in different ways. And in talking to my parents about it, they always taught us to be loving. You know, we were not supposed to be any pushovers. My dad would teach us how to wrestle and how to defend ourselves and all that kind of stuff. But the idea is that we don't let people get to us. We were raised in a Christian home. We were raised to believe that Jesus is Lord, that he is love, and that we need to operate in both of those areas. One, that we acknowledge him as Lord, which means we obey what he says, and we acknowledge him in love, which means that we are to exemplify who he is and operate in love. So I don't recall ever getting into a really big squabble with anyone over the color of my skin. I remember getting in arguments and talks, but it was never really a big deal. Now, I was also biracial, and I didn't even understand that was a big deal until I was in the 4th grade. I remember I was in 4th grade, Mrs. Porter's class, and it was my birthday. It was May 17th, and my parents came to school, and they brought cupcakes, and they brought punch and cups and all this stuff. My dad snuck away from his job to meet my mom at the school and brought the stuff for the whole class and hung out. And I remember, and I'm going to drop names in this because they probably aren't even ever going to watch this, but it's just fun. So I'm sitting in class, and right in front of me there's this girl, and her name was Carrie Johnson. And Carrie Johnson is sitting right in front of me, and she looks at my mom and dad, and everybody's eating, and she's just sitting there going like this the whole time, and I just see the back of her head going, And then she looks up at me after my dad leaves, because he left a little bit early, and she goes, "That's your mom?" I was like, "Yeah, that's my mom." She looks at my mom, and then looks at me, and she goes, "But you're black." And I sat there, and I was like, my goodness, you're right. It wasn't that I didn't notice the color of my skin, but I finally noticed that there was something unique about my family, that my father was a different color than my mom. And I finally realized that, wow, most people's parents are the same color. I had a friend named Kiki Ikemiya. He was Japanese. Both of his parents were Japanese. You know, these other two guys that I was real good friends with, both their parents are white. And I looked at mine, I'm like, oh, that's different about us. So all that to say that race was not a big deal. I didn't even notice those things. And the way that we were raised, we dealt with it a little bit differently. Those guys who would call me those names, Big Freckle, Cinnamon Toast, all that kind of stuff, every single one of them became my friends. Every single one of them. RJ, Ryan, Craig, all those guys, they all became my friends. And I think it was mostly because I didn't let it bother me. I didn't let it get to me. Now, we're talking elementary school, and I'm going to talk about some other things that were not so elementary. But I experienced a lot of that. Some people might say, well, you grew up in Southern California, and it's a lot more diverse, and there's not as much racism there. But if you go back east, you go to some of those other places, you're going to experience more. Rightfully so. I believe that there's different places all over. But that's not actually true in terms of organizations. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, there's actually more racist organizations in Southern California than anywhere else in the nation except Texas and New York. Only Texas and New York have more racist organizations. And where I grew up in South Orange County, Mission Viejo, my family moved to Huntington Beach after my mother passed away. Those were hubs for neo-Nazi skinheads. And I had many a run-in with them. Many. I remember the first time I had a run-in with them, I was in 7th grade. At least that I knew I had a run-in with them. I was in 7th grade and I was walking home, and it was a rare occasion where I was walking home by myself. And you would walk down this one cul-de-sac, and it would take you through our old elementary school, and you would cross through the elementary school, and it was kind of a shortcut instead of going all around the neighborhood. Well, I'm walking down the cul-de-sac, getting ready, because there's stairs at the end of the cul-de-sac that go into the field of the elementary school, and there's 3 guys sitting there smoking. And as I get closer, I don't even know how I knew what they were, but I knew what they were. I knew they were skinheads. I saw the swastika on their neck, on one of their necks, and I saw the flight jackets, the whole thing, and I was like, oh yeah, these guys are bad news. And I saw them and they saw me. But I knew that you don't back down from people. So I just kept walking. I just kept walking straight at them, and they were looking at me. There's three of them. One of them, the big one, who was obviously the leader, was smoking, turned his back to me. And then the other two stood up because they were sitting down on this little fence and kind of stared at me as I was walking by. And I walked by, and they're mad dogging me. And I just looked at them. I said, how's it going, fellas? And started up the stairs. And then the big one who was smoking just looked down at me. And these guys, at this time, I'm like 11, 12, something like that. And these guys are all in their 20s. And he just says, F you, nigger. And then the other two just started laughing. And I just walked up the stairs and looked back at him, kept walking, and just kind of gave him a glare. And I remember the conversation. They're like, did he just say hi to us? Stupid N. And they just kept saying it and talking about it. And I kept walking and looking down at them. And they were looking up at me, trying to mad dog me. And I was just staring right back at them. And I remember being like, man, that was the first time I really got angry about someone saying something like that. Fast forward, a couple months later, there was this place called Fizzywigs. It was an arcade, and they had like different games and everything. And I went over there with a couple friends of mine. Well, while I'm in the arcade, there's a bunch of skinheads in there. And they started jawing and saying stuff to me and my friend. And it was so long ago, I don't even fully remember it. But they ended up walking outside, and it came time for us to leave. And we walked to the front door, and all of a sudden, we look out, and there's a truck parked out there. And all these guys are sitting in the back of the truck. And this dude walks up to me and my friends. They were white, and I was the only black one. And they said, don't go out there. They're waiting for you. And I just looked at them like, for me? And again, I'm like 12 years old at this time. And like, yeah, don't go out there. And the owner of the place, she happened to be Asian. And she came up to me and she said, if they're bothering you, you let me know. I'll call the cops and it'll stop. And I said, no, don't call the cops on them. It's okay. And I went to walk out the front door, and I was just going to walk home. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. But my friends were like, no. Let's go out the back. And she said, yeah, you can go out the back. So we snuck out the back and left, and I never heard from them again. But this is 12 years old. But I ran into them, and I saw them so much, it just became, I don't want to say normal, but it was interesting. Now, I want to fast forward a little bit to some times when this really got in my face, and then how I was able to deal with them. And I'm going to share two specific stories with you guys. One's kind of more of a relationship than anything else. The other one is a story. Let me start by saying this. I was a bad kid. I got into a lot of trouble. I was probably third or fourth out of 14 in terms of overall spankings in the Bailey household. Total ditch days acquired. I definitely hold the record for that. But I went through a time where I was just a bad kid. So in high school, I ended up going to a continuation school, and after we moved to Huntington Beach. And in Huntington Beach, again, a high concentration of skinheads and neo-Nazis, very high, especially at this time. We're talking 1995, 94, 96 in Huntington Beach. So there was a lot of that. Well, I went to this continuation school, and while I'm there, everybody else who's kind of a bad kid was there too. So we had gang members, there were Samoan gangs down there at that time. There was Latino gangs that were there. And then there was white supremacists. And we're all in this one school, Valley Vista High School down in Fountain Valley. And I was one of two black kids at the school, me and my friend Jonathan. And I remember there was a day where Jonathan was in one of his classes, and he got into it with one of the white supremacist dudes. And I didn't have any problems with anybody. I just kind of kept to myself, was kind of nice to everybody. But Jonathan got into it with one of these guys. And so it was a big deal. And they were going to fight after school. Now let me back up a little bit. When I started going to the school, I was a bad kid, but my parents always taught me that you treat everybody with respect. That was something that was very big. My dad was big on us respecting our mother, respecting each other, and representing Christ. So when I went to this school, even though I was cut up and I would get in trouble, I tried to do my best to respect my teachers and respect those who were around me. Well, in this class, they mixed everybody up. So they weren't going to try and keep certain gang members apart or Nazis apart. And I ended up meeting a friend who became a friend, a guy named John, who was in my geography class at this school. So I talked to him, and it was weird because I knew he was a neo-Nazi, but we just ended up talking. So I became friends with him. Just treated him with respect, had conversations, treated it like it was no big deal. Almost kind of played the stupid card, almost like I didn't really acknowledge that he was neo-Nazi. In my economics class, I had a guy named Ben in there. Now, Ben didn't like me at all, but we got put in the same group on a project together, and we ended up having conversations. And this guy, I say friend loosely, but we treated each other civilly, I would say. Now, John ended up working with me at the same place. He ended up getting a job where I was working. We worked at Rally's Hamburgers together right there on Brookhurst and Adams in Huntington Beach. Well, it used to be a Rally's Hamburgers. I think it's a Starbucks now. So anyway, we started working together. I had been there for a few months, and when he came to interview, I actually told my manager, hey, he's a good guy. You should hire him. So John got hired, and we became closer friends. Even though he was still in the neo-Nazi gang, people, it's crazy. So he became a friend, and we worked together. And we were talking about going to the Marines together. I was going to enlist in the Marines, and he was going to enlist as well. But my dad told me that wasn't for me. So John ended up going to the Marines and everything. But long story short, let's go back to Jonathan, my other friend. I got two friends. John, the white supremacist. Jonathan, the other African-American at the school. Jonathan gets into this fight with these guys. With this white supremacist. After school, they get into another fight, and it's right there, and I'm walking up on it. And they get into a scuffle, and these guys end up breaking up. The teachers come out, break it up, but we have to walk home. I used to walk home from school. So we're walking, and these guys are trailing us the whole time. Now this white supremacist has a car full of his friends, and they're trailing us and trying to egg us on to come over. I'm like, don't even do it. It's not worth it. We end up making it home. They give up. Next day, we get to school, and everybody's talking about how me and Jonathan are going to get jumped. We're going to get jumped. And my friend John and my friend Ben are just quiet. We're not even talking. And they're kind of like, this is going to happen. We're just kind of staying out of this. Well, I also made two other friends. One of my friends' name was Muna. And this guy, Muna, was 16 years old. He was probably about 6'5", like 250. He was a big Samoan dude. And his brother was part of one of the Samoan gangs down there. I also made friends with a guy named Juan. And he was part of one of the Latino gangs down there. So all day long, everybody's talking about it. I mean, the administration catches wind of it. And I'm in my last class. It's an art class. And everybody's like, you guys, what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm just going to walk home like I normally do. Well, one of the administrators comes into my classroom and calls me outside and says, hey, I hear what's going on. It was actually the principal. I hear what's going on, and we're going to get you a ride home. But in my mind, I was like, no, I'm not going to back down and change my routine because these guys are trying to intimidate me. I will not be intimidated. I'm not going to do that. So I thanked him for it, and he said, are you sure you don't want to ride? I was like, no. He said, do you want us to call the cops? And I was like, oh, that might be a good idea. But again, I don't want to call the cops because then, you're just a punk. I was like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Well, he comes back after I tell him that and says, look, they're out there parked waiting for you guys. So the way my school was laid out, the school was down here, and then up here there was a street that went up, and it went to an overpass. Well, we're down here at the school, and then look up here, and all along the street up here, cars full of skinheads. There's cars full of skinheads. And I was like, oh, wow, that's fun. So I took my shirt off. I had my little, tank top on underneath, all 120 pounds of me. And my friend Jonathan is like, all right, let's just walk out there and let's do this. 20 minutes goes by, bell rings, we're out the door. And we walk out the front, and I'm expecting to see these skinheads waiting for us, and we're going to walk and we're going to have trouble. But I didn't see them. They were all gone. And out front, in the front of the school, was my friend Juan and my friend Muna. And with each of them was about 4 cars full of dudes. So Juan had called his buddies in his gang, and then Muna had called his brother and their gang, and they showed up at the school to escort me and my friend Jonathan home. And they walked up to us, and they're like, "Hey, we're going to escort you home." I was like, "For real?" He's like, "Yeah, they already took off." So apparently they saw them roll up, and they just left. They didn't want any part of this. And I gave the guys some love, and I said, "No, I think you guys have already done your job." And we walked home, and I'll tell you, we never had a problem again with the white supremacists at that school. So what's the moral of the story? Excuse any knocking. I got the babies on the other side of the door. The moral of the story is this. If you love people, then that kind of squashes everything. All I did was do what my parents told me and try to live a Christian life at this school. And it commanded the respect of people to the point where I didn't need to call the police. I didn't need anybody to drive me in their car home. But there are people that I just showed love to that showed up to help me and my friend. There's something about just loving people that breaks down walls. I'm going to go back to my friend John and my friend Ben. There's a reason I brought them up. Because in that moment, there wasn't anything that they can do. But they saw that, and everybody was talking about it at school for the rest of the year. But it comes into play a little bit later. Like I said, me and my white supremacist friend, John, worked at Rally's Hamburgers. One night, John wasn't working. I was working. It was a Friday night. Everybody's cruising in Huntington Beach. And a big, huge truck rolls in to the Rally's Hamburgers parking lot. And they park, so they're going to get up and come up to the walk-up. And I look at the truck. I was like, that truck looks familiar. And sure enough, it was my friend Ben. He was like the leader of this one sect of the white supremacists, the skinheads down there. It was his truck, and it was full of guys. So he parks, and then all these guys jump out of his truck. And there's probably 6 of them, and maybe 7, including Ben, something like that. And they see me through the window, and they come up, and they automatically start John. They come up to I had a side window right here where I would take care of the drive up, and then I had a window right here in front of me that took care of the walk up. I would manage both. Well, they come up to the walk up, they come up to the side here, and they're yelling and screaming racist stuff, and then my manager's like, "What the heck?" They're like, "Call the police, send them to the back." I was like, "No." I was like, "I'll take care of it." But one of my other friends comes up and he says, "You know what? Maybe you should go to the back." I was like, "No, I'm not going to go to the back." Anyway, I'm standing there getting ready to take their orders, and Ben walks up. And I look at him, and these guys are all John. And I open the window, ready to take their order. I say, "Hey, Ben, what's going on?" And he looked at me, and they all looked at him, and he was just frozen. He didn't know what to say. He just kind of nodded his head, and then looked at the guys, and he's like, "Guys, let's go somewhere else." He's like, "We're out of here." And that's what they did. They all jumped back in his truck and drove away and went somewhere else. He didn't say, "Hey, guys, leave him alone. This is my friend Jesse," or anything like that. But because I had built a relationship with this guy in economics class, in that situation where he would have joined in, he actually stopped it by doing what he could and just saying, "Let's go somewhere else." Again, dealing with racism, it's not about being loud about it all the time. Yes, there are some times where we need to be loud. But for me, in dealing with it, and this is real racist stuff. I mean, I'm talking with people who are part of an organization that part of their plan is to eliminate black people, to cause havoc in people's lives. So this wasn't somebody who was just raised somewhere. These are people that were actually a part of an organization that I had to deal with. And by treating them with a level of respect, it turned out for my favor. Now, go back to John. John left the white supremacists, ended up going to the Marines, and haven't talked to him since. But when I talked to him last, he was not a white supremacist. He departed from that. People, we gotta start changing how we deal with racism. Now, a lot of this is, I'm just telling you, yes, I've dealt with racism. And do you deal with less racism because you're half black or half white? I don't think so at all. Again, I get it from both sides. I'm going to share that in just a minute. But I want to hear from you guys. Like, what are some of your experiences with racism? What are some of the things that you guys have seen? Not just as a black person. I'm talking about as white people. There are black racists too. I'll tell you that right now. In fact, I've experienced more racism from the black community than I have from the white community. Now, maybe not to the same level, but absolutely more. Absolutely more. And I'm going to share some of those with you guys as well. But I want to highlight the fact that it's not if there's racism, it's how we deal with it. Now, granted, there's a different level today than there was 100 years ago. We need to acknowledge that. But when we look at the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and how he handled it with peaceful protest, actual peaceful protest, not claiming it's a peaceful protest and going out and looting and burning. That's not peaceful. And by the way, the whole reason that this stuff started with George Floyd, again, I pray that he did not, I pray that he wouldn't have died. I do not think that was a good thing. But it was not racially motivated, people. I don't know if you guys have seen the recent footage that came out. The body cameras of the police officers, they were not being racist towards him. George Floyd was being erratic, irrational, and uncooperative. And they subdued him and took him out of the car because he was freaking out. The man was on drugs. Now, should they have had their knee on his neck for so long? No, but I don't believe 1 second. And you can tell he was not choked by the knee. He had a heart attack and an anxiety attack because he was on drugs. And that's what ended his life. I'm not sure what all the autopsy reports say. I know what the initial one said. And it was consistent with that. But then they got a second one and changed it. Probably to bow down to the mob. But anyway, this whole stuff was started. And it wasn't even racially motivated. It wasn't. But now we're out looting and burning in the streets. And it does nothing. It does no good. So how do we deal with racism? How do we address it? By loving people. By doing what Martin Luther King did. You stand firm against it. But you still have to love people. You still have to treat them with respect. I don't know one racist person who stopped being racist because somebody called them a racist and yelled names at them for being racist. I don't know anyone who's changed their mind on something because they got in a fight with someone over racism. As a matter of fact, that makes it worse. It makes it worse. Telling somebody that they don't experience racism because they're half black is actually racist. I love my friend, and I don't think he is a racist person, but that is a racist statement because you're assuming, just based on the color of my skin, that I could not have experienced racism as much as you have or to the extent that you have. And again, I'm not comparing racism stories with anybody, but I'm just saying, I've had my fair share and probably more than most. I don't know many black people who have been confronted by skinheads or neo-Nazi KKK members in their life, and I did it several times on multiple occasions. And that's just the reality of it. We are going to experience those things. Not because it's in the DNA of our nation. It's because it's in the DNA of human beings to be hateful. Racism is not about the color of your skin. It's about self. It's about the fact that human beings love self and therefore hate anything that is in opposition to it. And that manifests in many ways. If you don't hate someone because of the color of their skin, you'll find another reason to hate them. There's people who hate people because they have money. There's people who have money who hate people because they're poor. There's tribes in Africa that are the exact same skin tone but hate each other because they're from a different tribe, from a different region, because they speak a different language. Hate is in the fallen nature of every human being, and if we don't have one thing, we'll find another reason to hate. Race is just easy because it's visible. You can point out the ones you want to hate. It's easy. And racism, by the way, isn't something that you have or you don't have. It's a spectrum that you fall on. Let me give you an example of some mild racism. Many of you have heard me talk about this if you've attended my church for any, or the church that I pastor for any length of time. It's called the brother nod. Everybody in the black community knows about the brother nod. The brother nod is this. When you see another black person, you acknowledge them and you give them the nod. You can walk down the street and be a black person and you can see any number of other races and they don't get the nod. But if you see a black person, they get the nod. Interesting. I was meeting with a young black brother last year, and we were just having a conversation, and we met at Denny's. And while we're sitting there, we were sitting in the booth that was right next to the entrance. And we're having our conversation, and it happened to be around this topic, around race and how we deal with it. And he was, again, a little more passionate about racism and the way it's dealt with. And I was bringing more of kind of my perspective and being loving, and not that he wasn't being loving. I'm just saying we had a different viewpoint on it. And I brought up this point that there's a spectrum that we fall on racism. And during the course of our conversation, he said hi to only one person that walked by. And remember, we're sitting by the door, so we have multiple people walking by. Everybody's going in and out from the restaurant in front of us. And he said hi to one person. And I pointed that out a little bit later in our conversation. I took note of that. And I just went to see if he would say hi to anyone else. And I told him, I said, hey, look, who have you said hi to while we've been sitting here? And we had been sitting there for about an hour at this point. He said, I don't know, that one guy. I said, what was he? He said he was black. I said, do you know how many other people have passed by, walked by, and you did not acknowledge them, didn't look their way, didn't try to say hi, nothing. I said, but the one black person that walks by, you look up and say hello to. I said, that's what I'm talking about. It's just mild. It's not malicious. It's not harmful. It's just there. There's part of us as human beings that just gravitates towards what's most like us. And then we are more suspicious of those things that are not like us. So as someone who's half black and half white, I find myself caught in the middle. For many black people, I'm just not black enough. Whether it's culturally, skin tone, whatever it is, I'm just not black enough. And then for every other race that's out there, they look at me and I'm a black guy. So I've actually gotten racism from both. I get racist comments, and they're usually mild racist comments from black people. I've got black people who say I'm not really black. Because of my conservative views, I've been called a coon, an Uncle Tom, a house nigger. I've had people say things about my children because they're mixed. I've had, and by the way, these are all Christians, y'all. I'm not even talking about people out in the world. I'm talking about people who call themselves Christians, calling me these names and calling my children names. They say they're believers. That to me tells me that tells me that they exalt their color and their race above their Christ. So, anyway, again, people are going to be people. But I've actually experienced more of that. My wife has experienced more racism from black people and more pushback from black people than I have from white people, just in our relationship. We would get looks all the time. We would get, we went to my young cousin's funeral, and it was in Watts. And we're at a black church, and I'm there, and this is my bride. She's walking in with me, and she was so disrespected. There were people throwing looks at her. She was probably the only white person there. People throwing looks at her. We had people in the choir looking at my wife, glaring at her and whispering and pointing at her in the middle of my cousin's funeral. And then when we had the recession, not the recession, but the processional where we went down and we said hello and greeted my cousin's mother and the pastor, she was snubbed by the pastor and those who were in the line. Didn't even want to look at her. Skipped over her. I've had black pastors come to a church that we previously went to and brought her up on stage to use her as an example. And then while this wasn't necessarily racially motivated, there wasn't any direct evidence for that based on who this pastor was, and he's a well-known pastor. I absolutely believe it was. He belittled her and talked down to her on stage. I mean, it goes both ways here, y'all. So I've experienced it on both sides of the fence. But I want to share one more story with you guys that just shows the power of the gospel, because here's the most important part. Regardless of where people are at, our job is to preach the gospel as believers. As a Christian, I believe that I'm supposed to share the truth of Jesus Christ, and that is that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Whether it's racism or lust or stealing or murder or lies, whatever sin that there is, we have all sinned, and that we all have the opportunity to receive forgiveness for those sins. And there's no better example of this than the story I'm about to share with you. Many of you may have already heard this. But this happened again while we were living in Huntington Beach. It involves one of my siblings. My brother, who's just above me, he was the ninth born and I'm the 10th. I won't use his name, but many of you know him. He was going to Orange Coast College at the time, and he was walking home across a field. And while he's walking, he noticed like rocks just going psh, psh. He's like, what's that? He turns around, and there's 3 skinheads a ways away throwing things at him. He decides to ignore them and just keep walking. As he keeps walking, he turns around and notices that they're getting closer. Eventually, they're right up on him. They're walking down a main street at this point, and they're yelling racial slurs and saying things at him. And my brother just says, hey, guys, he just continues walking straight ahead. There's 3 of them behind him. He says, guys, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. And one of them, the biggest of them, ends up hitting my brother from behind in the side of his face. Now, my brother he's a strong guy, and he knows how to handle himself. But he was very strong in his walk with the Lord at this time. Shook it off, turned the other cheek, and kept walking. He eventually walked into a strip mall area and walked into a Blockbuster Video. You guys remember Blockbuster Video? So you know we're in the 90s. He went in there just to gather himself. A gentleman saw what was happening in his car and turned around and parked and went into Blockbuster to talk to my brother and said, hey, I saw what happened. I also want you to know that the guys are out on the corner and it looks like one of them has a knife. So my brother looked out and he said, I want you to get in the car with me. So my brother got in the car with them and drove away and drove my brother home. Well, a couple weeks go by and my brother and I were on the bus. We used to bus everywhere. And he and I were best friends. We did everything together. So when he came home and he told us what had happened, I was on fire. I was so ticked off that someone had actually put their hands on my older brother. And I was like, what are we going to do? But there was nothing to do. It was over. We didn't know who they were. Well, we're on the bus a couple weeks later, like I said. And on the bus, we're sitting actually in the back of the bus. And if anybody rides the bus, you know that the seats in the very front, they face each other. And then the ones in the middle face forward. And then in the back, there's bench seats that face each other again. When we're on a packed bus, I mean, it's packed. Everybody's in there, but the bus drivers have to tell everybody to sit down if there's a seat. Well, there's one seat on the bus. One seat, and it's right in front of my brother and I. So we're just sitting there, we're talking and everything. And we go to the bus stop, and this dude gets on, pays his fare, and the bus driver says, "You got to find a seat. Sit down." So he's making his way towards the back. My brother looks up. I almost said his name. My brother looks up and says, "That's one of the dudes." And this guy, he's probably about 6'5". You know, he's a tall, lengthy guy. And he walks all the way to the back, and he has to sit in the seat right in front of my brother and I. So we take off, we start moving, and I'm looking at my brother like, "Oh, it is on. What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" Well, the guy looks up, looks at both of us, looks at my brother and recognizes him, and then just drops his head down like, "Oh, shoot." And I'm like, "Oh, we got him. This dude's dead meat, and he already knows it." So I'm sitting there just waiting for, this is my older brother, I'm just waiting for his cue. I'm like, okay, we're going to wait for him to get off the bus, and then we're going to jump him. What are we going to do? We're going to talk mess to him right now, make him pee his pants. What are we going to do? Well, none of that. My brother reaches into his back pocket and pulls out his wallet, takes his wallet, and slaps the guy on the knee and says, "Hey, do you remember me?" The guy looks up, and he is so just in fear. He's like, "Oh, yeah, man, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't mean to da 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 da." And just starts. And my brother says, "Be quiet." He said, "Listen to me." He opens up his wallet and takes out a picture of my mom and dad, and then starts showing him pictures of the family. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is our enemy, and you've just shown him pictures of all of our family. Good job. But my brother was being used by God. He said, "This is my family." He said, "This is my mother. This is my father. We're mixed." He said, "These are my brothers. These are my sisters." He said, "We're a family." He said, "I know why you're doing what you're doing, and I know why you're a part of this group. It's because you want a family." And he began to share the gospel with him. Began to talk to him about the family of God. I don't even remember all of what he said because I was in so much shock. Because I was like, we have an opportunity to take vengeance on an enemy. And he stops and he shares the gospel with him. Tells him about Jesus. Tells him that God loves him. Tells him that God wants him to be a part of his family and that he doesn't need to be a part of this hate. Then reaches into his wallet and gives him $20. Now, this is back in the 90s, and you're talking about a family of 14. We did not have a lot of money at this time. We were in dire straits, as a matter of fact. That $20 represented food for us and our younger siblings. And he gave him $20. The only $20 I think we had. He said, "I want you to take this." He said, "There's a Bible bookstore up on such and such street." He said, "I want you to go buy a Bible. I want you to start to read it." And right about this time, we came up to our bus stop. And we had to stand up to go. The guy stood up, my brother stood up, and my brother gave him a hug. I was just dumbfounded. And the guy turned to me, and I gave him a hug. And we stepped off that bus. And the rest of the way home, I don't think we said one word. I just looked up at my brother, and I was like, okay, that's Jesus. I've heard about him my whole life, but that was the first time I really saw Jesus. And I really saw what the gospel was really about. I saw my brother love an enemy, someone that wanted to destroy him. And not just love on him, but give to him. And from what I understand, several months later, my brother ran into him again. And this guy had gotten out of that nonsense. I mean, listen, telling people that they have or haven't experienced racism, that doesn't matter. Do I get just as much racism because I'm black or white? Yeah. But it's not what we experience, it's what we do with those experiences. It's about how we handle ourselves in the midst of that. That story, that time, that experience, that has stayed with me for the rest of my life. And I'll be honest, that's what got me on a path to really seek the Lord, was when I got to see the gospel in action. So what do we do with racism? What do we do with you're not black enough and all these different things? You love people. I love my friend who said I'm not black enough to experience racism. I'm just going to love you. I'm going to love people who treat people wrong because of racism. But I'll tell you what the answer is not. The answer is not being racist to overcome racism. How can we sit here and be racist towards people when we're trying to fight racism? And I'm seeing this kind of stuff online, and it really makes me upset. Again, these are believers talking about, oh, you white Christians need to understand this, that, and the other. What are you talking about? Talking about white Christians, white evangelical Christians, and these are Christian brothers talking about them, generalizing. You've become racist. You've become what you hate. Saying things. Let me tell you what else is racist. It's racist for people to try and tell me that because I'm black, I don't have the advantages or I don't have the opportunities that other people have. There's so many people out there who are not black, who are defending blacks as kind of like this self-shaming culture that we have. Like white people need to shame themselves and say, oh, well, you don't have enough opportunity because you're black. Do you know how racist that is? Do you know how racist it is for you to say that I'm at a disadvantage because of the color of my skin? As if I couldn't own a home because I'm black, which I do. As if I couldn't support my family because I'm black. I can't get a job because I'm black. I can't go to school because I'm black. I can't get educated because I'm black. I have less opportunities for that. That's racist. That is just racist. I've got every opportunity. People need to stop saying that. Oh, well, you're only half black, so you get more opportunities. No. I have the same opportunities as everyone else. If black people really don't have all the opportunities and we're really oppressed, then why is it that we have so many people who migrate here from other parts of the world who are millionaires, who do very well? And I'm talking about people from Africa, true African Americans who are black, who come here and are very successful. No, that people come here because there's more opportunity. We need to stop that. That's racist to say that I can't because I'm black. No, that's not true. Now, was there a time where there was extreme oppression? Yes. Could there be, and is there, some residual impact from that? I believe that there is. But it's more of how we see ourselves than what the real opportunities are. We have to see ourselves differently. See, when it comes to racism, I was raised to see myself not as a black man, but as a Christian. And because I believe that through Christ, all things are possible, I would never thought of myself as being disadvantaged. Even if there was somebody who was racist or treated me that way or didn't want to hire me because of a certain reason other than my qualifications. Guess what? That was just an opportunity for me to overcome an obstacle. That's what that really is. I don't want to remove every obstacle. It makes for great stories. I love telling the stories about how racist people tried to come against me, but God was there for me. I love telling my children these stories because it helps train them. I loved hearing the stories of my father and how he dealt with racism. I'll tell you one story of my father's that he shared with us. And it really set the tone for how I dealt with it. My father, again, went to college at Chapman University, and he went into a store one time because they actually had integrated stores. It was a drugstore, from what I understand, as the story goes. And he was there, again, with his good friend, the one who married him. He walked into this establishment, and remember, this is Orange County back in the early 60s, and not every person had actually seen a black person in person. which is kind of funny to think. But my father walked into the store, and inside there was a white woman, and she had a little boy with her. And the little boy looked up at my dad and said, "Mama, he's got a dirty face." Now, as you can imagine, the entire place just stopped, terrified at what this black man was going to do, having heard a young white boy say my father was all dirty because of the color of his skin. When my father turned and walked to the woman, who I'm sure was just mortified, and he gave her a nod, and he knelt down to the little boy, and he said, "No, my skin's not dirty. It's just a different color than yours." He said, "Go ahead, touch my face. It won't come off." And little boy touched his face, and it didn't come off. And little boy said, "Your hair is funny too." He said, "No, go ahead and touch it." He said, "My hair is just like yours. It's just really, really curly. See?" And he let the boy touch his hair, let the boy touch his face, and then stood back up and said, "See?" And the boy just like, "Oh." And the mother, pretty much with tears in her eyes, just said, "Thank you." My dad gave him a nod and went back over with his friend. My father's friend told me that story too. It's not if there's racism, people. It's how we deal with it. It's using it as an opportunity to prove someone wrong. If everybody thinks you're a certain way because you're black, prove them wrong. Not that we have to go around trying to prove who we are or anything, but when we run into that, use it as an opportunity to change someone's heart and their mind. Not to just get upset about things. There's so many things to be upset about. Let's change our perspective. Let's change how we look at things. I want to go to the lines here real quick. Let's see. On the George Floyd situation, if he was being erratic, they could have put him in the car, shut the doors, and call it a day, haul him off to jail. I agree. They went about it in a wrong way. There was no need to do all that. Just my opinion. I agree 100%. I agree 100%. The cops have had their knee on my back for while I was acting erratic, and they threw me in the car till I relaxed. I agree. My statement in saying that the George Floyd incident wasn't racially motivated was not to defend it and say that they did the right thing. They absolutely should not have done that. There was no reason to have him pinned on the ground like that. They already had him in the car. All they had to do was shut the door and keep him in the car. I have no clue why they brought him out just to put him on the floor again. I'm not going to analyze the video. I don't know what anyone was thinking, but everything that I see is that if he was still on that path to hyperventilating and panicking, and he was on those drugs, he might have just had the heart attack in the car too. Again, no excuse for how the officers treated him, but my point is I don't feel that it was racially motivated. I feel that it was more than anything probably just being a bully. But even from hearing how the officers were with him, you didn't hear any anger or anything like that. Again, I can't judge, but I do feel strongly it was not racially motivated. And my point in bringing that up was that we're all in an uproar over something that was a false narrative, really. They should have just put him in the car and hauled him away and brought him in and booked him. He did not have to die. I agree. Any other thoughts or things that you guys have been going through? Amen. It says, can you please address the Jewish racism in this conversation? I ask because the Jewish community in America fled persecution or slavery to the czars. Yes. Being told to hide the fact that I'm Jewish because of racism. Amen. I mean, blacks don't corner the market on racism. As a matter of fact, there's more death threats to Jews than any other race or culture in America. So that's something that needs to be addressed as well. Blacks do not corner the market on racism. Racism is felt across the board. I'm telling you, this NFAC with, what's the guy's name? I forgot. This dude cracks me up. But the NFAC is a black liberation organization who, Grandmaster Jay, there he is, Grandmaster Jay. This guy is a stark racist. He is a stark racist. Making demands like, give us Texas, give black people Texas so we can do our own thing, marching up and down the streets with guns and all this stuff, using, military tactics. I mean, some of his own people don't even know how to handle guns and shot one of the other guys. I mean, just horrible stuff. But he's being racist. A lot of the whole thing with Nick Cannon, I know he came out and apologized, but to be honest, that sounded more like damage control than revelation. Saying just random generalizations against white people. It goes both ways, and we can't participate in that and think that things are going to get any better. The way things get better is by loving each other. That's what we need to do. So my point in sharing all those stories with you guys tonight was just, I have experienced racism, and I have so many more stories. Those are just the ones that I wanted to share tonight. And it wasn't just to say, I've experienced racism. It's to say, look, there's a way that we can deal with racism that produces a good result. Let's just love people. Go out and protest. Absolutely. But don't do it in anger. Do it in love. Do it in love. Stop saying things to people that generalize them. Stop saying things like you didn't experience racism because you're only half black. Stop saying that racism doesn't exist, because that's not true. It absolutely does. But also stop race baiting. Stop race baiting and trying to use your race as an excuse to get loud or to get upset, when sometimes these things aren't even racially motivated. We have to allow for change to happen. And that happens with moving forward. I'm not saying that we forget about the past. I'm just saying we move forward from it and learn from it. Black Lives Matter, stirring a lot of things up. We got Black Lives Matter on NBA courts now, when George Floyd wasn't killed because he was black. It's just bad decisions from bully cops. It's that simple. So I want to take a moment and just invite you guys to change the way you think on this. And the easiest way to change the way you think on this is to change the way you view yourself. And the way you learn to change the way you view yourself is that come to an understanding of the one who made you. When you look at yourself through the eyes of your Creator, it changes the way you see you, and it changes the way you see everyone else. When you can look at yourself and understand that you have been created by God, that you are not a cosmic accident that evolved over billions of years from slime, that you're more than that you have a purpose, you have a call, you have a soul, you have a God in heaven that loved you enough to allow you to exist and has a purpose for you, it changes. It changes the way you see yourself. When you can see yourself and acknowledge that you've made mistakes, but there's a God who loves you and forgives you of that, it changes. It changes the way you see other people. Because now I don't see a neo-Nazi skinhead. I don't see a black Israelite who thinks that all white people are the devil. I see human beings that have been born into sin just like I was, who have yet to understand who they are through the one who created them. I see people who made mistakes just like I made mistakes. And if God can forgive me, then I can forgive them and love them. So I want to encourage you, if you don't know the Lord, if you don't know Jesus, this is the real Jesus. The one that loves, forgives, and heals, and brings hope. If you don't know him, you can. All you need to do is ask him. Ask him and put your faith in him with all your heart. And he'll come in. And it's through him that we can unite. It's not under a Black Lives Matter banner. It's not under a political party. But when we unite under Christ, now we become one. Now we become one race. The human race created by God. So I just invite you to consider that and to ponder that. I invite you guys to share this. If there's anybody you know who would benefit from hearing my testimony and dealing with racism, and I invite you guys to share it. Share it, and let's see if somebody's life can't be changed. But I'll tell you this, change starts with us personally. Start loving people, start forgiving people, and things will get better. That's for sure. Now listen, I want to remind everybody as we come to an end tonight that we have new videos that are going to come out every Tuesday and every Friday. So every Tuesday and Friday, there's going to be a new video out for you guys to see. So I want to encourage you guys to check in. Those are going to be like 5-10 minute shorts where I'm just giving thoughts on different things. We're going to ask different questions, and it's not always going to be about what's going on politically and everything. That's just kind of where we are right now. So those are the things that I want to address. But we're going to have things on everything from how do we know the Bible's real to where's the evidence that there's a God? Is it okay to get a tattoo? Is it a sin to drink? You know, what does God think about all these things? So we're going to address those biblically and on those. And then every Sunday at 7:30 p.m., we're going to have our live session and Q&A. So I invite you guys to be a part of that. But with that, we're going to call it a night. And I want to invite you guys to check in on Friday. And also don't forget to subscribe to The Bridge and click on that bell so that when I post a new video, you guys can get the notification and you can go on and check it out. I'd love for you guys to do that. But until then, remember, keep it bold, keep it balanced, and keep it biblical. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time on The Bridge.
Papa said build a bridge, must subtract the division. Discernment dictate decisions, relationship and religion. All these days to be balanced, seen the world is so cold. Leaders barely being biblical, boys afraid to be bold. Ain't the Jesus I know, all praise to the chief. One and only high priest, son of God with the keys. Price of life ain't cheap, paid in blood not clean. Wanna cross over water, follow what he taught us, start walking. I'ma go build a bridge. Yeah, he said build a bridge. Our attention's on the sides, word be dividing truth from the fibs. Christ the light and it's lit, time to go build a bridge. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, keep it biblical for sure. Teach it balanced, preach it bold, 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 bold.